Story 1. Am I the a-hole for outshining the bride? So I, 27 female, am a black African woman. I'm living and working in Germany for a fixed period on secondment. While here, I became quite friendly with a colleague, 60 female, and she invited me to her daughter's wedding. I was excited as I'd never been to a white wedding. I asked if there was a dress code/color scheme to adhere to since it wasn't specified on the invite. I was told the code is dress to impress. Bet. Day of the wedding, I understood the assignment. I wear my traditional clothing, which is beautiful and not German. The garment is green, so no problem there. Or so I thought. I get a lot of questions and compliments at the wedding, which I genuinely downplay because it's not my day. My colleague seems colder than usual, but I get no mind since she's the mother of the bride and could be preoccupied. The bride is downright rude to me, but again, I give her grace. I congratulate her and thank her for including me, and I get a tight face in response. I keep to the edges of the room as the music isn't my vibe and I'm just observing how European weddings work. I leave around 8 after 5 hours and go home before the wedding finishes. Monday, I walk into whispers in the office. People were strangely and more reserved than usual. An office friend pulls me aside and fills me in. The bride's mother is fuming. My outfit was too extravagant and inappropriate. I drew attention from the bride and commandeered the room. I was rude and disrespectful. She told people all about it. I approached the mother of the bride and asked to speak, but she says she has nothing to say to me. I ask her why she has to tell everyone else about me, but not to me, and she calls me an insolent child. I explain to anyone who scolds me that this was my first white people wedding. I specifically asked what to wear and follow the guidelines. Where I'm from, there's no such thing as outshining the bride. Weddings are a fashion show and a chance to wear your best and brightest clothes. They told me this isn't Africa, which was racially coded, and people here have manners. I laughed and told that person to go to hell, so she's telling people I lack remorse for my behavior. I'm wondering if I'm the a-hole, though. Gee, I wonder, are you the a-hole who took the words of a person that told you to dress to impress, and you did just that, and were polite and downplayed stuff, and genuinely acted like a good person in every way you thought? Or is the old racist lady the a-hole? I wonder who the a-hole is in this situation. Yeah, it's definitely her! What an absolute... Oh, I have so many bad words for that. Just gross. Like, I'm sorry. If you think that there's going to be cultural divides or whatever, then you try and, bring that up. Well, dress to impress, but you don't want to do this or this in German weddings or whatever. You have to know that different cultures are going to approach weddings differently. And so if you thought that's something that, she might misunderstand, you need to clarify. That's on you, racist old lady. But also, I wouldn't expect you to, because eat dirt. Story 2. Ended my relationship with my boyfriend over things he did as a teen. Here is my story, which happened some years ago. I, 26 female at the time, had just started dating Thomas, 28 male, and things seemed promising. Very sweet man, educated and quite smart, good looks. After 7 weeks of dating, he invited me and 2 of his childhood friends, let's call them Alex and Bart, for a long 29th birthday celebration weekend at his father's country house in a small French town. His father was going to be around as well, and I was very excited to meet everyone. Day 1, Friday, is fun, and I'm happy to get along well with Thomas's father and a smart and caring man. Day 2, Saturday. After a very nice day, we enjoyed a party in the garden with the neighbors, including some friends of Thomas. After a few hours and lots of drinks, a group of people gathered around a small campfire and started sharing childhood memories. This is where things go wrong. At first, of course, innocent and dumb stories as you would expect, but then Thomas and his friends started sharing sick stuff. In particular, they told a story about how when they were 14 or 15 years old, they found it very amusing to bully for almost 6 months Arthur, a boy from their school who was very isolated and shy, making jokes, calling names, you name it. As if this was not enough, they created a fake girl profile on MSN Messenger, a computer platform to exchange live messages that we used in years in the 2000s, and spent effing months exchanging messages with him under the false girl identity, flirting and developing a false relationship with the poor boy. Some people were confident at school, and it became a big and cruel joke behind Arthur's back. They used pictures of Bart's real cousin, and the boy truly thought he had some kind of online girlfriend to whom he even sent confessions and love messages. At some point, they got bored and scheduled a false rendezvous in real life, asking the boy to take a bus for 2 or 3 hours wearing a t-shirt Elmer the Elephant based on a private joke. There was no one waiting for him, and they did not know how long he waited over there by himself. If Arthur had not already understood what was going on, he found out the next day at school after Thomas and Bart told the story to everyone and even shared the love messages that Arthur had been writing. The poor boy stopped coming to class and changed school, and it's easy to imagine that this must have been extremely traumatizing to him. Do you think that Thomas, Alex, and Bart had any bit of shame about it? Not a bit of remorse. In particular on Thomas and Bart's side. They kept making jokes about it and even seemed to regret that they were not good enough to be evil to convince the boy to send nudes or intimate pics. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if he had done so. To say I felt uncomfortable would be a gross understatement. I was horrified and started to despise Thomas more than anything. I was not the only one shocked. Thomas's father, who heard the end of the story, had the most disappointed look in his eyes. His stupid son was so drunk that he did not even notice it. I escaped the party immediately after that and got back to the house. I could not sleep at all that night, and I kept thinking about the evening and how Thomas was still finding this funny. I heard him coming to bed around 4 a.m., but I pretended I was asleep. Day 3, Sunday, was the actual birthday, and the initial plan was that I would take Thomas on a 1-to-1 fancy surprise date for lunch nearby, and then we would meet the group for a late afternoon party. Instead, I woke up very early on Sunday morning, took all my stuff in silence, and went alone to the train station where I took a direct train heading back to Paris. I decided to send a text to Thomas wishing him a happy birthday and telling him to meet me at a certain location 1 hour from the house for a surprise, and that I needed to go a little bit in advance to make sure that everything would be perfect. I had picked the location randomly using Google Maps to gain time. Thomas read the text around 10 a.m. when he woke up. He responded with excitement that he would follow the instructions religiously. When he arrived there at 12:30, I told him to wait further as there was a little delay on something. Then I asked him to meet me at a restaurant that was 30 minutes drive from the initial location. When he arrived at 13:15, I texted him that I was on my way. I would arrive in 20 minutes and that he would understand when he saw me why I made him wait. I also asked him to order some food and the most expensive bottle on the menu. Around 13:30, he started calling me several times and sent a lot of worried texts, and after 45 minutes, I responded in French, "So how does it feel to have people play with your feelings?" Then I stopped responding. I let him call and text the entire afternoon, but never responded. At some point, an unknown number called me. It was his friend Alex asking what was going on and that Thomas's birthday was completely ruined because of what I did. I just responded, "This is an extremely small payback for what you did to Arthur. Tell Thomas to stop calling me," and hung up. I blocked them. I still felt bad the entire evening as I had started to grow attached to Thomas back then. In the following days, a common friend called me to say that my reaction was completely absurd and unfair, that it was not my role to punish someone for actions they did as a teenager, that they were adults' ways of saying things, and that I had been completely crazy. Only a few people supported what I did, everyone else seemed to think I was a bee. Thomas tried to fix things and win me back for a few months afterward. I never responded to any of his messages. I don't regret it. I simply hope that Arthur, who should be 35 or 36 years old now, is well. I support you. I absolutely support this. I maybe wouldn't have if he had relayed these stories and seemed kind of indifferent about it, maybe not regretting it. But it was the fact that he was reveling in telling these stories, and none of you get to say oh, but he was drunk. Nope, I'm sorry. That's just too telling and too revealing. And you know what she did? It was one day, ruined his one little birthday thing, but it was a one-day thing. They tormented that Arthur kid for months. 6 months. That's really twisted. And as an adult, he should have had the hindsight to look back at that and be like, I can't believe I did that. If he had regretted it, that would be one thing. Some people can be bullies in junior high and high school and kind of realize just how bad that was, make amends, and become better people. I fully believe that's possible. But when you're 28 and you're still reveling about how you tortured a kid so bad that he had to transfer schools, that really says something about you as a person. And frankly, I think that this little bit of revenge, just ruining his birthday a bit and making him wait there and all that kind of stuff, I think that is some pretty minor revenge in the grand scheme of things, so fully supported. Story 3. How do I tell my friend that he needs to stop seeing me as his future wife? I, 20 female, have been best friends with this guy, 20 male, who we'll call Ben, since we were both in elementary school. Our parents are close and always fostered this friendship between us, and when we got older, encouraged a relationship. We dated for a year in our early teens before breaking up and deciding to stay friends as I realized I was a lesbian. The problem is that ever since then, when he talks about his future, he always puts me in the role of his stay-at-home wife. For a while, I thought it was cute that he wanted me in his life so much, since I thought that it was just a best friends dreaming about living together thing. But lately, I've begun to become uncomfortable with it, as it's clear he's genuinely serious about this. It all came to a head yesterday when he called me after getting back from a Tinder date. When I asked how it went, he began to rant to me about how horrible the girl was and how they weren't compatible at all. During his ranting, he mentioned that she asked him what his plans for his future looked like, and then couldn't handle his response. His response to her? It was him talking about how he would have me move in with him. He would work full-time and I would stay at home and take care of the house, and we would have a dog and a cat and raise at least 2 children together. She didn't take her date. What? She didn't take her date talking about what was essentially a married life with another woman and left the date immediately, leaving him with the bill. I didn't say anything at the time, but it put me off. Ben knows I don't want kids, nor do I want to be a stay-at-home wife. He also knows that I don't have feelings for him and can't have feelings for any man at all. The fact that he's so genuinely serious about this weird fantasy is uncomfortable for me. So how do I confront him about this without causing issues between our families and in our friendship? Outside of this one issue, he's a great friend and I don't want to lose him. Any advice would be appreciated. Thanks. Oh my gosh, you just have to be blunt with him. You have to squash this dream of his because that is unhealthy. Like, to be going out on a date as a 20-year-old and then to be like, it's like, oh, what are your plans? Oh, well, I know I'm on a date with you, but I'm actually going to marry my lesbian best friend. She's going to be my stay-at-home wife and have my kids for me. What? No! I'm sorry, like, I know he might be a great friend otherwise, but if you're just like trying to ignore this and be like, yeah, no, he's great and everything, and just trying to ignore that part, clearly you can't ignore it. You cannot ignore this. You have to address this, and you have to say like, this will never happen. You need to stop. And if you cannot stop, we are not going to be friends because friends respect their friends, and he is not respecting you in those regards at all. So please squash these dreams before this delusion of his becomes even worse, because right now it is approaching a level that I would say is kind of frightening. Story 4. The neighborhood remembers. The neighborhood punishes. I decided it's finally time to let the world know what happened to a sociopath who dared to cross the neighborhood. To set the stage, I used to live in a big but not huge city. Let's call it Palmville. I lived near the corner of a dense suburb nestled between overstuffed apartment buildings, a river that smelled like diesel when at low tide, and 2 busy highways. I was a minority in this neighborhood, and I caught a lot of heat for it. People didn't really like white people there, but enough of our neighbors were accepting of us that, aside from a few disagreements between families and the beatings that came with them, I didn't feel like I was in danger when leaving my home. It was a rough neighborhood, but it was my home, and it protects its own. The community center was like a temple, and let's call her AM was the priestess. In our neighborhood, she was respected like a living deity, and her calm and understanding reflected her status. I never once saw her behave without a strong moral code. And the final piece to set this stage, our former landlord. Short Asian lady in all the stereotypical ways, kind and sweet. Our house was above my parents' pay grade, and she knew it. She went out of her way to find house repairs and maintenance jobs for tenants that were having money problems. She'd pay them by taking chunks out of their rent, oftentimes a bit larger than how much the work they did was worth. Looking back, she was probably illegal, but that's irrelevant because she died. The circumstances surrounding her death were suspect, but none of the suspects played a part in this story, so there's no need to go into detail on it. Her sons, who wanted nothing to do with real estate, took over the business. They couldn't make heads or tails of how she managed to float books with so much red in them and began dumping properties. Ours was on that list. I harbor no ill will towards them and still wish them the best, but the guy who bought the house, Enter the sociopath and today's victim. This guy wasted no time in making our lives hell. His first action was to raise the rent. Apparently, when the account changed heads, he was allowed to update the rent to modern pricing. We'd been there for several years and were paying below market even for the onset, so this was a huge blow by itself. The second blow came when he said that the rent had to be ready in full on the first of every month, no partial payments, no work to reduce it, no extensions. Full rent on the first of the month or an eviction notice on the second. This was hemorrhaging our savings, but we were surviving for the moment. Meanwhile, AM had lobbied hard for the city to co-fund a revival project to renovate the entire aging suburb, and she succeeded. One street at a time had conga lines of work trucks almost every day, and people were getting old leaky pipes replaced, sinkholes in yards patched, fences repaired, paint renewed. It was an amazing thing, an enticing thing for the sociopath. Being at the corner of the neighborhood, our house was on the last street on the list, and sociopath wanted us out so he could relist the house after renovation. He never said this directly, but multiple conversations made his intent clear even for a 10-year-old me. Random inspections, overhyping of minor problems with the house, even so far as trying to bring us up on completely false animal abuse charges because our cat was attacked by what we believe was a raccoon and he tried to claim we did it. Yeah, because a vet can't figure out the difference between knife wounds and a mauling. We read the writing on the wall and began preparations to move. We decided to move in with my oldest brother in a place I'll call Banjo Land. Most of us had moved except my other brother, who stayed behind because he still had a lot of social ties in Palmville, and his new job meant if he cut corners, he could keep paying the sociopath's inflated bills. Well, despite his best efforts, he came out $20 short one month, and the sociopath jumped on it. He had 30 days. We made the 400-mile trip from Banjo Land to Palmville to get the rest of our stuff, and I can't say as I approved of my brother's living conditions, but I guess that's beside the point. The month passed rather uneventfully. I guess sociopath figured he'd won, so there was no need to burn the gas to drive out and gloat. The neighborhood had learned what was going on, and that was the first time I'd ever been back in that neighborhood where I didn't get a single call-out, a single glare, a single racist remark. Everybody behaved reverently. It was kind of disturbing, in all honesty. I guess people in lower incomes all know what eviction means and felt like I was having a bad enough time already. Well, 20 days later, he says it's time to leave. We still had a week left, but it didn't matter. We didn't have the money to try fighting it with a lawyer. AM descended from the heavens and bought us a couple extra days, but it was evident he really wanted us out, possibly because the work trucks were now one street away. The last time I ever saw the house I grew up in, workmen were throwing my childhood possessions into a large bin when we supposedly still had 3 days left to leave. Everything that follows is a collection of information I got through the grapevine and phone calls with people present at the event. Immediately, sociopath moved into the house himself. Why, you may ask? People who owned the homes they were living in were getting the full cost of renovations computed by the city. He figured that by moving in himself, he'd be able to get his house he bought at liquidation price renovated for free and flip it. AM was having none of it. She explained to him that at the time the revival project was approved, that house was a rental lot and they can't change the budget now. She then explained to him that the partial cost coverage that had been approved for the lot was in our name, not his, and he wasn't eligible for partial cost comping either. He'd have to pay every penny himself, and since the entire neighborhood was getting a facelift, he was required to at least renovate the exterior, otherwise she'd see the house condemned as an eyesore or dilapidated, or whatever the legal term is. He went really cheap on the renovations, basically putting in new carpet and a coat of paint. This would later come to bite him in the butt. He then began trying to sell the house in earnest. The neighborhood remembered what he'd done. There were vandalisms when nobody was there and loud noises from the neighbors when people were there to look the house over, and any time the prospective buyer asked around, they got the full stink eye from anybody they talked to. They made sure he simply couldn't get that house sold at market value. After 3 months of this, he lowered the listing price. Then a month later, he lowered it again and finally got a bite. EM personally made sure he had to file every single piece of paperwork before it changed hands. Every single part of the house had to be inspected thoroughly, and that's when Karma herself caught up with him. In his hasty and cheap renovations, he'd somehow damaged the pipes. Black mold. AM remembered how he'd treated us, and she decided to pay him back in kind. I never heard how exactly she pulled it off, but she managed to delay him getting the news about the black mold being discovered for several days, long enough that by the time he did get the news, he didn't have enough time left to try getting it cleaned or make a last-ditch effort to save the house. The house was condemned days later. In their final act, AM and members of the neighborhood filed every single complaint and injunction they could and arranged for him to be compelled by the city to demolish the house immediately, a cost he had to pay out of his own pocket. He tried to destroy a family and broke laws just to make some quick cash, and instead was left fighting a year-long legal battle and ended up losing thousands. The neighborhood remembers. The neighborhood punishes. Oh, I love a sweet, touching story about a crappy landlord getting exactly what he deserves. It sucks to hear about, like, the nice, sweet landlord that you had that tried to do everything to help you out. Like, rare, wonderful landlords who are just trying to help people in whatever way they can. I heard with so much joy, but they never seem to stick around. And then you get just the scuzziest landlords like this guy. At times, too many of them just go on way too long without getting any sort of comeuppance. But to hear about this neighborhood coming together to just shun this guy, it's well deserved. He was a jerk. He cared about nothing but money and not about the people that were under his care and stuff. So it's to him. I hope it is a lesson learned, and I hope that he tries to be a better person in the future. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.